Dublin in the 90s, and somewhere between the grey estate blocks and the glittering neon of Dublin's nightclubs, a rumour is spreading. 40,000 ecstasy tablets have vanished. In the pubs, the young guys with baseball caps are whispering about it over pints. Dealers in flats are sweating, and across town, a man everyone calls Cotton, Joe, is losing his mind. He did not start out as a kingpin. Joseph Delaney spent 23 years running a production line at Cadbury's chocolate factory. He wore a white coat and carried a clipboard. He lived in a semi on the north side with his wife and 3 children. He went to work, punched a clock, and sometimes brought home bags of misshaped chocolate bars for his kids. But somewhere in his 50s, the boredom and frustration curdled. He left Cadbury's, bought a taxi plate, dipped into the brothel business, and discovered he liked the rush. He opened an escort agency with a kitschy name, Thrills and Frills, and around the same time began sampling the rave drug his sons were selling on the streets. Thank you for watching our channel. Before we continue, we would really appreciate it if you subscribe and share your thoughts on this true crime documentary. Those first forays into vice made his double life. When he was arrested for running brothels, he shrugged it off as business. When he and a girlfriend were caught in violent sex games, he laughed that he was a good Catholic who went to Mass. To friends he could be charming. To anyone who crossed him, he was vicious. He was not content to play small time. He wanted to sit at the top of the table. Dublin, in the mid-1990s, is awash with little white pills. Ecstasy is the drug that fuels an entire generation's weekends. Imported from the Netherlands in bulk, the tablets travel a well-worn route, Amsterdam to Paris by road, then north to Cherbourg by ferry, hidden in trucks or camper vans, onto the ferry to Rosslare, and then through networks of couriers into the city. The rave scene is booming, from warehouses on the quays to fields in County Meath. Teenagers pay a tenner a tab, dance until dawn, and crash at sunrise. Scott Delaney, Joe's oldest boy, is one of the biggest dealers in the city. He tells friends he sells 30,000 tablets a week. He hires toughs from Martin Cahill's crew to act as bodyguards and has friends like Mark Dwyer, a young man who is supposed to be a hitman with blood on his hands. Scott lives like a lesser Pablo Escobar, driving decent cars and throwing money around. His success draws his father in. Joe watches his son's profits, watches the network of couriers moving pills from Amsterdam to Dublin, and he decides he should be the one directing it. Joe Delaney does not do anything by halves. As soon as he enters the drug trade, he demands respect. He begins to use cocaine and whiskey to fuel his paranoia and rage. He hires muscle, fixes up a hideout in Naas, County Kildare, and turns the rented bungalow into the nerve centre of his new empire. The place is nicknamed La Rochelle by some, though in truth it is just an ordinary house with thick curtains and a loud sound system. Money starts to flow through Joe's hands. He sells a house and swords for £125,000. He sells taxi plates for $200,000. He claims poverty to the revenue, but nothing about his life is modest anymore. From Amsterdam, a shipment of 40,000 ecstasy tablets is en route. The product moves through Paris, onto a ferry at Cherbourg, and up to Dublin. It should arrive without incident. Instead, it disappears. Someone diverts the load, sells it elsewhere or hides it, and cotton-wrapped rage takes hold of Joe Delaney. He convinces himself that his son's friend Mark Dwyer has stolen the stash. There is no evidence. The suspicion forms, hardens, and becomes a death sentence. In the underworld, you cannot allow anyone to steal from you. If you do not act, others will take it as weakness. Joe decides to make an example of Mark. He summons his son Scott and other trusted men. Among them is Anthony Adams, a van driver who has been asked to do a favor he cannot refuse. Joe's plan is simple. They will seize Dwyer, bring him to the Naas house, and force him to confess. If he admits nothing, they will extract the truth with iron bars. The men know Joe's violent streak. Witnesses will later describe him as having an enormous propensity for violence. None dare refuse. The operation begins late on a wet December evening. Scott is the bait. He He is 24 years old, jittery from cocaine, but he has enough loyalty to his father or fear of him to follow orders. He drives to Ballybough to a small flat in Dublin's north inner city, where Mark Dwyer is living with his girlfriend and some friends. They drink, they take cocaine. Scott keeps mentioning vigilantes and sounding off about people being out to get him. Dwyer senses that something is off, but does not leave. Around midnight, heavy footsteps pound up the stairs. 3 masked men smash the door with a sledgehammer. One carries a sawn-off shotgun. In seconds, they have Dwyer on the floor. They tie his hands with a TV flex, pull a pillowcase over his head, and carry him down the stairs. The neighbors pretend not to hear. In the hallway, Anthony Adams phones Joe and delivers the coded message.
"I have that thing you wanted."
The kidnap team bundles Dwyer into a van and speeds out of Dublin along the N7 toward Naas. At the bungalow in Naas, Adrienne McGuinness sits on a couch. She is 28, a mother of 1, and she has been asked to drop off a gram of cocaine. She knows Joe Delaney socially. She denies being his lover. She has heard rumors about his capacity for violence, but has never seen it up close. Joe has been drinking whiskey and snorting cocaine since the afternoon. He plays M People's Search for a Hero on repeat. The music's uplifting chorus fills the rooms. He is grinding his teeth when the abductors drag Mark Dwyer in, blindfolded and bound. Adrienne understands she cannot leave. Joe marches Dwyer into a bedroom, handcuffs him, and starts beating him with an iron bar. There is no preliminary questioning. Each blow is punctuated by Joe shouting about stolen tablets, conspiracies, betrayals. He uses a baseball bat, then a nail bar, then a knife. He takes breaks only to take another line of cocaine or swig whiskey. Then he goes back into the room. The beating lasts for hours. Adrienne hears Dwyer screaming, begs him to stop, but Joe is out of his head. When Scott tries to intervene, Joe punches his own son in the face and orders him to watch. At some point, Joe tells Adrienne to fetch a piece of carpet from the bedroom. It is soaked in blood. He orders her to drive into the countryside and dump it. She obeys, terrified that if she refuses, she will be killed. When she returns, she hears Joe on the phone telling someone, "The hardest thing I ever had to do was leave Scott in the field, and the little bastard is dead." She realizes then that the plan is to kill Dwyer and to use Scott as a decoy. If the Gardaí find them in a field together, Joe thinks, they will assume vigilantes have taken revenge on the young men without implicating higher-ups. A car drives through the dark back roads from Naas towards the outskirts of Finglas. Joe is at the wheel. Scott is in the back with Dwyer, who is now barely conscious, tied up and groaning. They pull into an isolated lane near Scribblestown. Joe orders Scott out and leads Dwyer into a field. A single shot rings out. Dwyer falls forward. Blood pools into the cold grass. Joe clubs his son unconscious and leaves him beside the corpse. Then, he drives back to Naas and goes to bed. Morning light exposes a horror for all of Ireland to see. A dog walker finds the body of Mark Dwyer, hands bound, head hooded, 17 distinct injuries on his torso and legs, a bullet wound in the back of his skull. The crime scene shocks seasoned detectives. Dublin's underworld buzzes with news of the killing, and rumors swirl about who is responsible. Joe Delaney is not discreet. He boasts in pubs that he has taught a lesson to any would-be thief. He tells people he murdered Mark Dwyer in a haze of whiskey and cocaine. He says he is untouchable. Detective Inspector Hubert Collins and Detective Superintendent Cormac Gordon are assigned the investigation. This is uncharted territory. No one has ever been convicted for a gangland murder in Ireland. Witness intimidation, silence, and fear have sunk previous cases. Collins and Gordon know they must build the strongest case possible. They pick up the first thread when the Evening Herald splashes a front-page story naming Dwyer as dead and Scott Delaney as injured. The day the story runs, Gardaí spots Joe on Grafton Street reading the paper. They interpret it as proof that he knows exactly what happened and is gauging the public reaction. Investigators start putting pressure on everyone in Joe's orbit. Anthony Adams is arrested. He admits driving the van, but insists he was paid only £1,000 and did not know a murder was being planned. He says Joe's reputation for violence made it impossible to refuse. Adrienne McGuinness is taken in. Initially, she sticks to the story Joe gave her, that she and Joe were having sex at the time of the murder, a manufactured alibi for which Joe offered her £10,000 and a car. Days before the first trial, she decides to tell the truth. She describes the blood, the iron bars, the way Joe played music to drown out the screams. She tells the court she saw Joe cut the blood-stained carpet and force her to dump it. She denies ever being his lover and rejects the bribe. Joe's sons are questioned. Robbie, a former male model, is called a rip-off merchant by his father, who now blames him for introducing him to ecstasy. Scott, once his father's right hand, cannot live with what he has seen. Haunted by flashbacks, he suffers nightmares, and later says that at times he felt suicidal. When the guards arrested him, he agrees to testify against Joe. In an extraordinary spectacle, a son takes the stand and tells the jury that his father beat Mark Dwyer senseless and ordered his execution. Scott says he tried to stop the killing and was punched by Joe. He recounts the iron bar, the pillowcase over Dwyer's head, the screams that filled the house. The courtroom is silent as he speaks. Joe Delaney is also called to the witness box. The prosecution barrister Patrick Gadgby describes him as an inveterate liar. Joe claims he did not know Pat Judge, a murdered heroin dealer, when in fact they were close. He says he is a good Catholic who attends Mass every Sunday. Court records show he was a pimp who staged violent sex games. He says he cannot remember the name of his escort agency. The prosecution reminds him it was called Thrills and Frills. He says he is broke. The prosecution produces evidence he sold a house and taxi plates for large sums. He claims he never heard Mark Dwyer's screams. The jury did not believe him. Outside the courtroom, the Herald continues to publish salacious details. The paper notes that when Joe lies, he does not tell little fibs, but whoppers. It points out that he tried to blame others for the abduction, including his own son Scott and the ecstasy dealer Chris Curry. It reminds readers that guards saw him reading their coverage the day after the murder, and suggests that his fascination with the press helped convict him. Families of Dublin's criminal fraternity watch the coverage nervously. They understand that if Joe can be brought down, perhaps anyone can. The atmosphere inside the courtroom throughout both trials is charged with menace. Jurors glance nervously toward the public gallery, where hard men from Dublin's inner city sit with folded arms and narrowed eyes. Guards line the walls. There is talk that one juror received a silent phone call in the middle of the night and heard someone breathing down the line. On more than one occasion, Mr. Justice Quirk clears the court and warns that any attempt to intimidate jurors will result in contempt charges. Witnesses arrive under escort through side doors. Adrienne McGuinness wears a scarf over her head so she cannot be identified on the street. Detectives escort her from the witness box to a safe house afterwards. Scott Delaney spends his nights in a Garda station for his own protection. The sense that the underworld is watching is pervasive. Yet slowly the testimonies accumulate. The jurors begin to see patterns. The way Joe's lies contradict each other. The way he tries to place everyone else at the scene and himself somewhere else. The contrast between his claim of being a loving father and the cold way he talks about his sons. The sheer brutality of the torture described by Adrienne hits home. Even the jurors flinch when they hear how long the beating lasted. By the time the prosecution rests its case, the room is holding its breath. The first trial, held in 1998, collapses when the jury cannot reach a unanimous verdict. Witnesses are intimidated. One juror admits knowing a key witness, and the panel is discharged. The second trial, in May 1999, is held under tight security. Jurors are housed in a hotel with police protection. At one point, a bomb scare clears the courthouse. Yet the evidence is overwhelming. Adrienne McGuinness's testimony, Anthony Adams's admissions, forensic evidence from the house in Naas, and Scott Delaney's account converge. After 30 minutes of deliberation, the jury returns. They find Joseph guilty of murder and false imprisonment. Mr. Justice John Quirk sentences him to life in prison, calling the crime particularly foul and evil, and noting that Joe has destroyed countless young lives. For the first time in Irish legal history, a gangland murderer is convicted. Gardaí celebrate quietly. Collins and Gordon's meticulous work shows it is possible to break the cycle of fear. Joe Delaney is taken to Mountjoy prison. His son Scott's murder conviction is later quashed on appeal. When evidence shows he tried to stop the killing, he is retried as an accessory and serves 7.5 years before being released. Beyond the immediate verdict, the case forces the Irish state to confront the reality of organised crime. For decades, criminals had operated with impunity, secure in the knowledge that witnesses were too scared to testify and that jurors would be too intimidated to convict. Collins and Gordon's success leads to the creation of improved witness protection programs. It changes how trials are run, with anonymous juries, secure courtrooms, and temporary accommodation for jurors becoming more common. Politicians cite the Delaney case when advocating for non-jury trials for organised crime. The Criminal Assets Bureau continues to seize drug dealers' property. Communities leaders use the case as a talking point in schools, warning young people that the path from small-time dealing to life imprisonment is shorter than they think. In pubs and chip shops, old men still talk about the night the coppers finally nailed Cotton Eye. In more recent years, as new gangs emerge and feuds erupt, detectives tell rookies to remember how the Delaney case was won, by patient investigation, by supporting terrified witnesses, and by refusing to accept that some people are beyond the law. Joe's life behind bars does not mellow him. Reports from prison speak of a man who cannot control his temper. He assaults other inmates, abuses staff, and is moved between facilities. At one point, he is transferred to Wheatfield Prison after attempting to attack another prisoner in a row over drugs. He finds himself under constant guard when rumours surface that other gangs want him dead. In a system not used to handling gangland killers, he becomes a problem inmate. After more than 14 years locked up, he applies for permanent release. He argues that his age and ill health mean he is no longer a threat. He cites the new, more liberal policies of the Irish prison service. Victims' families and the guards object. Newspapers report that his prospects look good. For a time after his conviction, the courts continue to deal with the ripples from the murder. Anthony Adams is tried for his part in the kidnap. The judge hears that Adams drove the van, phoned Joe to say, "I have that thing you wanted," and then sat in the house while Mark was beaten. He is given 6 years. Journalists describe him as a small cog in a large machine. Pubs that once buzzed with talk about ecstasy shipments now whisper about plea bargains and prison sentences. The story does not end with Joe's conviction or release. The violence of December 1996 ripples outward. Adrian McGuinness becomes an anti-immigration activist in East Wall, Dublin, standing at protests and complaining about refugees. In court, she sues for compensation after minor car accidents. Judges accuse her of hiding previous claims. Scott Delaney, who now goes by Scott Knight, moves to Manchester and tries to go straight as a carpenter. Trauma haunts him. In interviews, he says the visions of what he witnessed gave him post-traumatic stress disorder. He talks about how a clinical psychologist saved his life. He admits he sold half of Dublin's ecstasy at his peak and lived like a gangster, but claims he is now clean, in recovery from cocaine and alcohol. His hypocrisy becomes fodder for commentators when he joins anti-immigration protests. He posts online about banning Islam and criticizes refugees as bringing crime to Ireland, despite his own convictions for drug dealing and smuggling. Police across Europe seize cocaine and cash from him in Belgium and Spain. He is stopped with assault rifles in France. He rails against outsiders while carrying the baggage of his own past. When you drive through Ballybor today, the flats look like any others. Kids kick footballs against red brick walls. Mothers push prams over cracked pavements. The memory of that December night has faded for many, but the outlines remain for those who know where to look. At the margins of mainstream society, suspicion and loyalty still govern relationships, and the lessons from Joe Delaney's downfall still circulate in underworld stories. Do not steal from your boss. Do not trust anyone. And violence begets violence. Guards still cite his case as proof that persistence and protection of witnesses can crack even the most intimidating gangs. For those who seek to romanticize the underworld, the screams that Adrienne McGuinness heard through the wall should be a warning. For Mark Dwyer's family, there is only an empty chair at the table. Cotton Eye Joe's story, like many crime sagas, is a case with a lesson about what happens when greed and paranoia eclipse humanity. It begins in a chocolate factory and ends in a prison cell, with a soundtrack of M people and the smell of cheap whiskey. It involves men who thought they were untouchable, and a woman who risked her life to tell the truth. It sends a message that however invisible you think you are, someone will talk, and one day, the Gardaí will knock on the door. And if you are Joseph Delaney, that knock is followed by the click of handcuffs, the flicker of cameras, and a life sentence that seems both inevitable and tragically avoidable.